Fake HOA cops. Arrested my daughter on her way to school. Didn't know I'm the Attorney General. 14-year-old Emily was taken off the street on her way to school, accused of suspicious walking by men pretending to be law enforcement. Behind them stood a shadow force created by a suburban HOA, run by unlicensed ex-contractors and shielded by silence. But what they didn't know was that Emily's mother was the state attorney general, and she was about to turn their fake authority into a very real reckoning. And wait until you hear how this entire scheme unraveled, and how justice, in the end, was delivered personally. The sun had just begun to rise above the rooftops of East Hollow, casting long golden rays over the neighborhood like a soft blanket. The community, nestled between sleepy, tree-lined streets and silent cul-de-sacs, wore its usual morning mask, pristine, controlled, and predictable. Sprinklers clicked on in perfect sync along manicured lawns, and mailboxes stood like sentinels in front of white-fenced homes, waiting for the daily routine to unfold. In one of those homes, 14-year-old Emily Walker zipped up her navy blue backpack, slipped her AirPods into her ears, and stepped out onto the familiar sidewalk. Her shoulder-length brown hair bounced lightly as she adjusted the strap and closed the gate behind her. Dressed in her school's dress code, a gray cardigan, pleated skirt, and white sneakers, she looked every bit the image of a typical 8th grade honor student. She wasn't late, but she was cutting it close. It was 7:35 a.m., and homeroom at Oak Ridge Middle started promptly at 8 o'clock. The walk was about 15 minutes, maybe 10 if she took the shortcut behind the community park, which she usually did. As she walked, the world around her was calm. Birds chirped in sync with her footsteps. The morning breeze carried the smell of freshly trimmed grass and blooming hydrangeas. Every few houses' garage doors hummed open as parents headed to work. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere behind her, a trash truck rumbled its way down the block. It was the kind of morning no one would remember, because nothing ever happened in East Hollow, until it did. As Emily neared the narrow stone archway that marked the entrance to Lakeside HOA Community Park, she slowed slightly, checking her phone. There were no new texts. Her friend Lily hadn't responded about lunch plans. She tucked the phone into her cardigan pocket and turned left toward the paved path that ran alongside the playground fence. And then, a low hum, tires on asphalt. She glanced up. A white SUV had turned the corner and was slowly creeping up the street toward her. Unmarked, no city emblem, no decals, no lights, just a plain, boxy vehicle that looked newer than most, clean, polished, and deliberate in its movements. Emily's steps hesitated. The SUV came to a smooth stop just ahead of her, idling near the sidewalk as if waiting for someone. But there was no one else around. Then both front doors opened. 2 men stepped out. They were dressed in dark tactical uniforms, black slacks, black boots, and buttoned shirts with stiff collars. No reflective vests, no body cams, no utility belts like the police officers she saw at school assemblies. Instead, stitched onto their chests, barely visible in the shadows, were rectangular patches, Lakeside Enforcement, no state seal, no city crest. Just those 2 words, as vague as they were ominous. Emily took a step back, instinctively pulling one earbud out. "Excuse me?" she said uncertainly. The taller man, mid-40s, pale, crew-cut, built like a football coach, raised his hand slowly, palm down, as if to calm her, but his voice was cold, clinical, like he was reciting a script. "You match a suspicious profile." Emily blinked. "What?" A strange silence hung in the air. The birds had gone quiet. Even the breeze seemed to pause. "I'm just going to school," she said, her voice rising ever so slightly. The second man, stockier, younger, no expression on his face, moved behind her in one sharp motion, and then she felt it. Plastic zip ties, pulled tight around her wrists before she could fully react. "Wait! Stop! What are you doing?" she cried out, panic breaking through. Her backpack slipped from her shoulders as they turned her around. She tried to resist, but it was like being caught in a machine that didn't listen. Her words, fast, breathless, spilled out. "I didn't do anything. I don't even know who you are. Let me go." They didn't answer. They didn't even look at her face. Her knees buckled slightly as she stumbled, forced toward the rear of the SUV. She craned her neck, searching the street. Nothing. No one. The neighborhood. The same neighborhood that watched over potlucks and pool parties and fireworks on the 4th of July had turned into a ghost town in the blink of an eye. No joggers, no cars, not even a curtain twitching from inside a window. The stocky man opened the rear door of the SUV and ducked his head to check the interior. Then, without a word, he nudged her forward. "I'm just going to school," Emily shouted again, her voice shaking. This time it was louder, desperate, almost piercing. Still, nothing. Not a single soul heard her. Or worse, maybe someone did and chose not to intervene. The taller man placed a firm hand on the top of her head and guided her into the vehicle. The moment the door shut behind her, the outside world disappeared, swallowed by tinted windows, locked doors, and silence. She sat there, stunned, her heart pounding in her chest like it was trying to break free. Her wrists burned from the restraints. Her backpack, with her homework, her lunch, and the note her mom had tucked inside that morning, was left lying on the sidewalk. The SUV pulled away, slow and smooth, back onto the same road where nothing bad was supposed to happen. And East Hollow? East Hollow stayed exactly the same. Perfect, quiet, clean, unaware or unwilling to see that a child had just been taken in broad daylight. The Walker home sat near the edge of the neighborhood, a classic two-story colonial with a red front door and wide porch swing that creaked softly in the wind. Inside, the morning was methodical, efficient, just like its occupant. Rachel Walker stood at the kitchen island, flipping through a dense folder of documents. She sipped black coffee from a ceramic mug that read, "Due process," or "Don't bother." The house was quiet now that Emily had left for school. A quiet Rachel normally welcomed. On the counter, her laptop displayed 3 open tabs, case files from an ongoing corruption investigation into a real estate lobbying firm. High profile, politically sensitive, and filled with land ownership loopholes that were anything but simple. But for Rachel, it was just another morning, until her phone rang. 8:07 a.m., Oak Ridge Middle School. She answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Walker? This is Miss Delaney from the front office. We just wanted to confirm, is Emily out today?" Rachel's brows furrowed. "No, she left the house at 7:30. Why?" "She didn't check in. Her homeroom teacher marked her absent. We thought she might be running late, but—" The voice on the other end kept talking, but Rachel's thoughts had already raced past it. She felt it in her chest, a tight, sharp sensation that pushed her body into motion before her mind could catch up. "Thank you, Miss Delaney," she said, already pulling up Emily's location tracker from her phone. One ping, then another. Emily's last known location was logged at 7:44 a.m., right near Lakeside Community Park. And then nothing. Rachel grabbed her keys, threw on her blazer, still buttoned only halfway, and was out the door within 60 seconds. By 8:17 a.m., she pulled up along the curb near the park entrance, just behind the little iron gate that Emily passed every day. Her tires hadn't stopped turning before she was out of the car. No Emily, no white SUV, just 2 men in tan polos and sunglasses lounging beside a HOA branded golf cart under the shade of a crepe myrtle tree. They were sipping coffee and chatting like it was any other Wednesday. Rachel approached them briskly. "Excuse me," she said, "did either of you see a white SUV come through here about 30 minutes ago? A teenage girl may have been with them. Brown hair, navy backpack, school uniform." The men paused mid-conversation. One of them, middle-aged, heavy-set, with a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, squinted at her like she'd interrupted something far less important than a missing child. "Might have been Lakeside Enforcement," he muttered, unconcerned. "They do rounds through the park sometimes." Rachel blinked. "Lakeside Enforcement?" The man shrugged. "They work security for the HOA. Check on loiterers, that kind of thing. They're around." He took another slow sip of his coffee. The other man added, almost helpfully, "They got some kind of patrol schedule, real serious about the rules." No last names, no uniforms, no effort to help, just indifference. Rachel said nothing for a second. Her hands remained at her sides, her voice calm, but inside, every professional instinct, built from 2 decades of prosecuting high-level criminal operations, went red. She glanced again toward the trail by the playground. Nothing. No movement, not even the sound of children. Something was wrong. Not the usual wrong. Not teenage drama or a forgotten phone. Something systemic. She turned and walked back to her car, her heels striking the pavement with precise rhythm. Inside the vehicle, she closed the door softly and stared at the steering wheel for a long moment. The rising tide inside her wasn't panic. It was calculation. A patrol that didn't answer to the police. A daughter who disappeared in broad daylight. A neighborhood that acted like this was normal. Rachel opened her laptop and connected to the state criminal database. If they wanted to play authority, they had no idea whom they were playing with. Rachel Walker wasn't someone who reacted on instinct alone. Her strength was in clarity under pressure. That clarity now sharpened into something colder, resolve. She sat behind the wheel of her car, parked just outside the HOA's main trail. Her laptop was open on the passenger seat, cell phone balanced against the console, notepad at her side already filled with timestamps and brief notes. Her first call was to the county sheriff's office. She requested a record of any juvenile detentions, arrests, or law enforcement activity in the East Hollow sector within the last 2 hours. A deputy placed her on hold for all of 47 seconds. When he returned, his voice was neutral. "There haven't been any arrests in that area this morning. No patrol cars assigned to the park or that subdivision." Rachel's gaze tightened. What about an unmarked white SUV? Possibly driven by off-duty officers or plainclothes deputies? Negative. No vehicles matching that description are operating in your zone. She thanked him, calmly, and ended the call. Next, she reached out to Bryce Taylor, a colleague at the State Bureau of Investigative Affairs, someone she'd worked with on organized crime stings. This wasn't a criminal case yet, but it was about to be. "Bryce," she said, skipping pleasantries, "I need license plate data from traffic surveillance near Lakeside Community Park between 7:30 and 7:50 a.m., white SUV, no tags, but check anything matching that vehicle type." He hesitated. "Is this related to your daughter?" "Yes." Her voice left no room for delay. "Give me 15 minutes. Rachel ended the call and went to work herself. She opened a new browser tab and pulled up the Lakeside Homeowners Association website. It looked like most HOA sites: pastel colors, stock photos of families with golden retrievers, headlines about community picnics and pool rules. On the surface, it was harmless. She scanned the site's navigation bar. Amenities, events, safety and compliance, member access. She clicked safety and compliance. A few paragraphs of boilerplate language appeared about ensuring a peaceful neighborhood environment. She scrolled, and then she saw it. A line in smaller font, nearly hidden beneath a collapsible FAQ menu. As of March 1st, Lakeside HOA has partnered with a private enforcement division to ensure compliance with HOA regulations and maintain safety standards. Rachel narrowed her eyes. That phrase, private enforcement division, was deliberately vague. She clicked the embedded link. It opened a PDF, Community Security Standards V2, 4. Buried in the fine print between policies about fence heights and noise violations was a clause. Private enforcement officers may operate vehicles, issue HOA citations, detain individuals for investigation under HOA guidelines, and coordinate with local law enforcement when necessary. Detain individuals? Under what authority? Whose oversight? There was no mention of licensing, no municipal contracts, no legal framework, no governing agency. And Rachel knew, better than anyone, that language like this didn't come from law enforcement. It came from people pretending to be law enforcement. She leaned back in her seat, lips pressed into a thin line. They hadn't just overstepped. They had crossed a legal boundary so severe it reclassified everything they did, including taking Emily as unlawful detention, possibly even abduction. Her phone buzzed. It was Bryce. "Rachel," he said without pause, "I pulled surveillance footage from the smart pole near the south end of the park. The white SUV came through at 7:43 a.m. Plates not in the state or federal system, not registered to any official agency, not even a licensed private security outfit. Any identifying markings?" Just that same phrase, Lakeside Enforcement. No state registration, no permits, no VIN trace in government databases. That was the final confirmation. The HOA had built a shadow enforcement group. No authority, no training, no accountability. Just a logo, a uniform, and the illusion of power. And they had used that illusion to take her daughter. Rachel stared out the windshield at the trimmed hedges and pastel-painted homes of East Hollow. They had no idea what line they'd just crossed. They thought she was just another resident, just another parent. They didn't know she was the Attorney General of the state, but they were about to. The world outside had disappeared. The hum of the road, the golden light of morning, the houses and trees, all of it blurred behind the tinted glass as the white SUV drove further away from the neighborhood Emily had known her whole life. Her wrists, still bound by plastic ties, ached where they rubbed against her skin. Her breathing had slowed, but her heart was hammering, not just from fear, but from confusion. Why? That question echoed in her mind on a loop. Why had they stopped her? Why hadn't they explained anything? Why was no one helping? They drove for what felt like forever, though it was only about 15 minutes. The vehicle turned off the main road and rolled through a narrow access gate marked "Authorized Entry Only." Beyond the fence was a lot lined with faded storage units and cracked pavement. Weeds grew through the seams of the concrete. A prefab trailer sat in the far corner, partially obscured behind a dumpster and a stack of unused fencing. The SUV stopped there. Emily was let out, not roughly, but without care. She stumbled slightly as her foot hit a dip in the ground. Neither man offered help. The building had no signage, no flag, no police insignia, just a plastic door reinforced by a keypad lock, which beeped twice before they entered. Inside, the space was cold and dim. Fluorescent lights flickered above a bare hallway. The walls were painted in a dull gray-blue color, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and metal. There were no clocks, no windows, no sound, just the muffled hum of machinery somewhere behind the walls. The man who'd cuffed her, the taller one, finally introduced himself. "I'm Captain Myers," he said. The other younger one added, "You can call me Officer Trent." They said it like actors in a play, practiced, mechanical, not like real law enforcement, not like anyone who actually knew what they were doing. Emily stared at them, wide-eyed. Her mouth was dry, but her voice still found strength. "I didn't do anything," she said. "You have no right—" "We asked the questions," Myers cut in, tone even. They led her into a small room, if you could call it that. 4 walls, 1 camera mounted in the corner, and in the center, a single chair, metal bolted to the floor. They removed the zip ties, but motioned for her to sit. The questions started almost immediately, disjointed, confusing. "Why were you walking on the east sidewalk near the park? Do you know the Burrell family on Willow Drive? Did anyone ask you to monitor security cameras in the neighborhood?" Emily blinked. "What? I don't even know who the Burrells are. I was walking to school." Myers tilted his head slightly, as if analyzing her expression. "Do you usually take that path?" "Yes, every day, like everyone else." Trent smirked and jotted something in a notepad. Myers circled slowly behind her chair. His boots echoed lightly against the vinyl floor. When she mentioned carefully, "My mom works for the government," they didn't react the way she hoped. They didn't apologize or stop or call anyone. Instead, Trent gave a short laugh. "Yeah? So does mine. In traffic court." Myers chuckled as if it were a shared joke. Emily looked between them, her stomach tightening. They weren't just dismissive. They were mocking. Not because they didn't believe her, but because they didn't care. To them, she wasn't a student. She wasn't the daughter of someone important. She was just another incident. After a few more aimless questions, they stepped out of the room and shut the door behind them. It clicked audibly, a heavy sound, more final than a lock. Emily looked around. The room was lit by a single bulb in the ceiling. The camera in the corner blinked a red light, recording. There were no posters, no paperwork, no clock, nothing to tell her how much time had passed. She sat there, hands folded in her lap, heart pounding. She tried to remember the steps her mother had taught her. Stay calm, pay attention, notice exits, stay grounded. But her thoughts were spiraling. Had her mom noticed yet? Had the school called? Were they looking for her? She looked up at the camera, not out of defiance, but like it might blink back and say, "We see you. Help is coming." But it didn't. It just watched. The chair beneath her was cold. The silence grew thicker. The questions they asked didn't make sense, but the message behind them did. They weren't trying to gather facts. They were trying to assert control. And in that moment, alone in a plain, windowless room, Emily Walker understood something no child should have to. These people weren't real officers, and this place wasn't safe. Rachel Walker didn't tremble. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace the floor or tear at her hair. She acted. At 8:53 a.m., she sat in her office, her back straight, her mind already 10 steps ahead. The calm morning of court filings and quiet coffee had long since turned into a full-scale response operation. The HOA, in a reckless bid for control, had taken the daughter of the one person in the state best equipped to dismantle them, and Rachel Walker had no intention of asking nicely. Her fingers moved swiftly across her keyboard as she drafted the first document. A formal cease and desist letter addressed to the Lakeside Homeowners Association Board of Directors. Language was sharp, direct, and legally binding. All activity under the banner of Lakeside Enforcement is hereby suspended, pending criminal investigation into unlawful impersonation of government authority and illegal detainment. She attached it to an email and sent it to all 9 board members, their HOA council, and the county attorney's office, with a copy marked urgent to the governor's liaison. At 9:14 a.m., she picked up the phone and called her federal contacts. First, the state police commissioner, then the local FBI field office deputy director. Her voice was calm, not frantic, but absolute. Each sentence she spoke was laced with unmistakable weight. A minor has been unlawfully detained by individuals operating under a fake enforcement structure established by a suburban HOA. No license, no badge, no authority. We have surveillance footage, vehicle identification, and proof of detainment. The child is my daughter, but this case is bigger than that. I'm invoking full prosecutorial authority under state and federal jurisdiction. I want immediate coordination. By 10 a.m., 3 task forces had eyes on Lakeside's so-called security substation. By 10:47 a.m., a temporary emergency writ was signed by a state circuit judge, authorizing the immediate release and protective custody of any juvenile currently held under the HOA's supervision. Rachel had written the motion herself. It was airtight. At 11:39 a.m., 2 unmarked federal vehicles, one from the FBI, one from the State Bureau, rolled into the edge of the gated lot near the park. Moments later, a black SUV with government plates followed. Behind it, a tactical response unit from state police pulled up in silent formation. Across the street, neighbors peeked from behind curtains, phones pressed to windows, unaware that their community safety committee had just triggered a statewide legal operation. And then, at 11:52 a.m., Rachel Walker stepped out of a third vehicle, alone. She wore her blazer buttoned to the collar, her hair pulled back. No escort, no press, just the weight of office behind every step she took toward the front of the HOA's security office. She didn't knock. She opened the door. Inside, the building was quiet, tense, like a paper structure under pressure, waiting to crumble. The door to the inner hallway opened, and Captain Myers emerged. He still wore the black uniform. The patch on his chest still read Lakeside Enforcement. His stance was firm, practiced. His expression, amused. "Can I help you?" he said, a trace of arrogance in his voice. "This is a restricted office." Rachel didn't blink. "I'm Rachel Walker," she said evenly, "Attorney General of this state." Her voice was low, measured, but each word landed with unmistakable clarity. "You are under arrest for unlawful detention of a minor, impersonation of law enforcement, operation of an unauthorized enforcement unit, and violation of multiple state and federal civil rights statutes." Myers opened his mouth, the smirk barely lingering, but it faded quickly, not because of what she said, but because of what stood behind her now. 2 federal agents in full tactical gear entering the hallway, one holding a file folder, the other holding cuffs. Myers froze. His confidence faltered. For the first time since that morning, someone told him no, and it mattered. Rachel stepped aside as officers moved in. Behind her, state police began sweeping the building, collecting records, inspecting rooms. In one of them, small, windowless, with a camera in the corner and a single chair bolted to the floor, they found Emily. Rachel entered that room minutes later. Emily stood as soon as she saw her mother. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "You found me." Rachel knelt and wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close. "Yes," she said, "and we're not finished." Because this wasn't just about rescue, it was about reckoning. And for the HOA, it had already begun. The illusion collapsed in less than 10 minutes. What had looked like a humble, oversized trailer tucked at the back of a suburban storage lot, unassuming, quiet, transformed under the glare of federal agents and tactical units into the epicenter of something deeply unlawful. The door was still swinging shut behind the arrested Captain Myers when agents fanned out into the interior. The findings began immediately. Inside a narrow locked room, agents discovered 3 steel holding enclosures. Not cells, not temporary detainment spaces, cages, reinforced with mesh wiring and industrial-grade locks, the kind used for storage. But these weren't empty. One of them contained a backpack and a half-eaten lunch. Another held a cot, a plastic tray, and a list taped to the wall titled "Rotation Schedule Night Watch." The third was open. Its door creaked slightly in the air-conditioned silence. None of this was in any way legal. None of it was even defensible. And yet it was here, quietly operating less than a mile from one of the state's top public schools. On a desk in what passed for Myers's office, agents found a stack of printed incident reports. Some were written by hand, others typed and printed on template forms with fake letterheads. Charges included loitering with intent to photograph, suspicious footpath deviation, failure to comply with community walking protocol. Each report was signed at the bottom by initials, CM or OT. Each one targeted a minor. Near the desk, a metal drawer was pried open. Inside, a collection of badges, all fake. Black plastic with embossed silver designs that mimicked official shields. None of them bore state identification. Most were labeled HOA Compliance Officer. One had the word Chief crudely engraved beneath the seal. It didn't stop there. In a side room, behind a hollow panel, they found 3 more teenagers. A girl around 16, a boy in middle school, another around Emily's age, shaken, quiet. They had been held for questioning, according to Trent, the now detained accomplice, for minor infractions that ranged from cutting across the park grass to riding a scooter without an HOA pass. Rachel was already inside the building when her daughter appeared in the hallway, led gently by a federal officer. Their eyes locked. Emily's pace quickened, then broke into a run. Rachel caught her mid-stride, pulling her into a tight embrace. No words were exchanged at first, just the hold of a mother who had reclaimed her child, and the child who finally felt safe again. But outside, the real storm was just beginning. By 12:48 p.m., the first local news van arrived. 10 minutes later, there were 5. By 1:15 p.m., state media had parked satellite trucks across the street. Reporters with microphones and earpieces clustered behind caution tape, speculating live on what had unfolded inside. Images of the white SUV, confiscated and towed, were already being broadcast statewide. Clips of agents carrying out boxes of documents, bags of seized items, and digital evidence drives scrolled across every screen. The words unauthorized detainment, illegal private enforcement, and child endangerment began to circulate. The HOA board tried to regroup. They released a brief statement through a spokesperson, claiming they were unaware of the enforcement team's overreach and shocked by the unfolding situation. But Rachel was ready. She didn't just have testimony, she had a paper trail. Earlier that week, as part of an unrelated probe, her office had subpoenaed financial documents from several suburban HOAs regarding lobbying expenditures. Lakeside was among them. What she had now, thanks to the cross-reference, was undeniable. $216,000 annually funneled from HOA member dues, under vague budget lines like compliance services, property oversight, and community security improvements. Payments made not to a licensed agency, but to a private shell company registered under the name of a former board member, who'd once worked in low-level security contracting. No insurance, no licensing, no audit trail. It was, in effect, a fully privatized policing operation run without oversight, given legitimacy by the blind trust of a community too comfortable to question authority. Rachel stood in front of the cameras at 2:05 p.m. Flanked by federal agents and local officers, she made a brief, firm statement. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, unregulated imitation of law enforcement constructed within a community structure designed for landscaping and neighborhood notices. It was an abuse of trust and of children's safety. Let this be clear. No title, no neighborhood charter, no patch on a uniform can override the law. What began as a quiet morning in a quiet suburb had turned into a case that would be studied in legal journals for years. And it wasn't over. Not yet. As the sun set over East Hollow, the headlines were already circling the nation. But behind the media frenzy and official statements, a different kind of work was taking place. Slower, quieter, more damning. The investigation had only just begun, but the pattern was unmistakable. By evening, the Attorney General's office, in cooperation with federal investigators, had unearthed a chain of contracts, payments, and board meeting records that revealed the truth. This wasn't a rogue officer or an accidental overreach. It was a system, designed, funded, and protected by the very people entrusted with community leadership. Years earlier, the Lakeside HOA Board of Directors had voted, off record, to explore private security options after a series of minor vandalism incidents near the tennis courts. Rather than consult with city officials or hire licensed patrol units, they were referred, by a former board president, to a group of consultants with a background in private defense. The contracts, signed under vaguely titled services like safety operations and resident compliance oversight, led back to a firm called Sentinel Civic Solutions, LLC, a shell company incorporated in another state by retired military personnel with no certified experience in law enforcement or community policing. The paper trail was shallow, no insurance, no training verification, no state registration. But the payments were substantial. Over 4 years, more than $850,000 of homeowner dues had been funneled to Sentinel. And that wasn't the only warning sign. One homeowner, who asked to remain anonymous, had submitted a formal complaint to the board 6 months earlier. His 12-year-old nephew, visiting for the weekend, had reportedly been warned with electrical compliance equipment for riding his bike on a wooded trail that crossed behind HOA-owned land. The boy was shaken. His parents were outraged, but the board dismissed the complaint as a misunderstanding, claiming their team had simply issued a verbal warning and followed safety protocol. No report was filed, no follow-up conducted. That complaint, like others discovered in the following hours, had never left the internal system. Suppressed, buried, labeled as resolved. This pattern repeated. Children scolded for walking alone, visitors questioned in driveways, teens approached for unregistered loitering. Each incident rationalized under the guise of protecting the community. But there had been no community vote, no transparency. No one, not even local police, had been notified of the group's activities. They called themselves enforcers, but under state law they were unauthorized civilians operating with the tools and presence of actual law enforcement, without any of the legal checks. At 7:15 p.m., standing before a press briefing outside the state capitol building, Rachel Walker addressed the situation. The crowd of journalists had grown dense. Every major outlet was present. Reporters held microphones above the crowd. Flashbulbs flickered against the evening sky. She stepped to the podium, firm, steady, and clear. What we are uncovering is not simply negligence. It is a system of unauthorized, unlicensed civilian policing that was organized, funded, and concealed under the administrative protections of a suburban HOA. Let's be honest with our words. If this had been discovered in any other setting, in any other part of the country, operating without oversight, uniforms without accountability, detaining minors in unregulated buildings, we wouldn't hesitate to call it by its proper name. She paused. The silence was deafening. This isn't community security. This is a domestic paramilitary structure. And in the legal context, yes, in any constitutional context, it qualifies as a militia. She let the word hang in the air. Cameras clicked, pens scratched against notepads, but no one interrupted. And let me be very clear, she continued, it operated on American soil, against American families, under the assumption that no one would ever look too closely. Behind her, the screen displayed the findings. Budget documents, security logs, maps of patrol routes, all created and stored by people with no legal right to monitor anything. Rachel's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Her authority wasn't in volume, it was in certainty. This is not just about HOA policy. This is about the rule of law, and anyone who believes they can enforce their own version of justice without accountability will be met with the full weight of real justice. She stepped away from the podium. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The silence spoke louder. Within 2 weeks, the entire board of the Lakeside Homeowners Association faced formal indictments. Each count was deliberate, supported by evidence and testimony. It said conspiracy to impersonate law enforcement, misuse of community funds, unlawful detention of minors, negligent endangerment. The so-called enforcement officers, Myers, Trent, and 3 additional hires, were charged in federal court. Their most serious counts included kidnapping, civil rights violations, and operating without licensure under the color of authority. The arrests made national headlines, but Rachel Walker's work wasn't finished. As Attorney General, she initiated a civil action personally on behalf of the community's affected families. And though she could have delegated the case, she chose not to. She filed pro bono, not just as a mother, not even just as a prosecutor, as a citizen. In her words, justice isn't complete until the system that allowed injustice to exist is dismantled and something stronger is built in its place. The community followed suit. A class action lawsuit, led by dozens of residents, was filed against the HOA board members, seeking damages for emotional distress, misuse of dues, and violations of individual rights. The financial impact was swift. Settlements totaled millions of dollars. Some families moved. Others stayed, determined to reclaim the place they had once trusted. Lakeside HOA was officially dissolved by court order. The name Lakeside, tainted by what had occurred, was retired. The neighborhood re-registered under a new charter, one built with strict transparency clauses, rotating leadership, and external legal oversight. A new Community Oversight Council replaced the board, composed not of volunteers in closed rooms, but of elected residents, partnered with local city liaisons. They called themselves the Hollow Commons, a nod to the place's origins, but with a clear message: never again behind closed doors. The fences remained, the trees still lined the sidewalks, but the silence that once covered misconduct was broken, replaced by something far more powerful: oversight, and the knowledge that one person, standing firm, can ignite a change bigger than themselves. 2 months had passed since that morning in East Hollow, the morning that had fractured the illusion of safety, of order, of control. Summer had rolled in slowly. The air was softer now, the days longer. Life in the renamed neighborhood, Hollow Commons, was beginning to resemble something close to normal again. And for Emily Walker, that meant returning to school. The first day back wasn't easy. She walked a little slower, her backpack a little heavier, her gaze more cautious as she passed the familiar sidewalk where everything had changed. Friends waved and hugged her. Teachers welcomed her back with gentle words and quiet understanding. She smiled, but not the way she used to. There was a different light behind her eyes now, a little more guarded, a little more aware. But she was safe, and she knew it. At home, things felt quieter too, not emptier, just steadier. Rachel had returned to her office full-time, though she left earlier now. She never let her phone sit unanswered for long, and every evening, without fail, she made it home in time to tuck Emily in. That night, with the window cracked open and the breeze carrying in the hum of late summer crickets, Rachel sat on the edge of her daughter's bed, smoothing the blanket across her. Emily looked up, thoughtful. "Mom," she said softly, "do you think they still would have done it? If they knew who you were?" Rachel paused. She looked into her daughter's eyes that had seen too much for their age, but still held a child's belief in right and wrong. "No," she said, "because they didn't care who you were. They just thought no one would fight back." Emily was quiet for a moment, then her lips curled into a faint smile, a real one. "But you did," she said. Rachel leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Always." The story stayed in the headlines for weeks. News anchors debated it. Legal experts dissected it. Editorials poured in from across the country, some in shock, some in praise, many in disbelief that such a thing had happened in the heart of suburbia. But for Rachel, it had never been about exposure. It was never about power, or reputation, or the courtroom victories that followed. It was about Emily. It was about every child who deserved to walk to school without fear, every parent who should be able to trust that their community protects, not controls, every resident who believed that rules must answer to laws, not replace them. And it was about drawing a line, clear, firm, and undeniable. If Rachel Walker had the power to dismantle a system that thought it could operate above the law, untouched and unseen, then she would. And she did. Justice wasn't simply served. It was delivered. Directly. Personally. Unmistakably. And Emily? She smiled again. A little wiser. A little stronger. But smiling nonetheless.